Okay, we're doing the combined parshiot of Acharei and Kedoshim, which once again, there the the subject matter moves from subject to subject quite quickly in the book of Vayikra. So part of what we're going to try and do is make some sense of this. And there is certainly a sort of a question to be asked is, why these things in this order? I just also should mention that Parshat Acharei is, in fact, the Torah reading for Yom Kippur, for reasons which will be obvious in just a moment. Okay, here we go. So this is the hold on 1 second. All right, here we go. Okay. Um, this is a sort of a layout of the parshiot of Vayikra. So we start over here with Vayikra, which has sacrifices. Tzav is more sacrifices, and then Tzav transitions us into sort of the opening day of the temple, which is they're going to be the investment of the Kohanim. And Shmini, of course, is the very first day of the temple. Shmini is what we read 2 weeks ago, or maybe a week and a half ago. And that's where the sons of Aaron perish because of bringing inappropriate fire. That is opening day of the Beit HaMikdash that they do that. We then have two parshiot that deal with the whole set of afflictions and issues that are related to Tuma and Tahara, purity and impurity. And Tazria is going to deal with various afflictions that are going to appear on the flesh, on hair, on clothing, even on house. And Mitzorah is going to tell us a little bit about how all of that is purified. And then we have a sort of a back end, or the last chapters deal with various kinds of emissions and menstruation and different aspects of purity, right? So we sort of go through things which are all very, very temple centric, and the reason that this parsha of Tazria and Mitzorah is very temple centric is because if you were afflicted with some of these diseases, you are ineligible to come into the temple courtyard, and you are also ineligible to eat from the sacrifices. And then we come to our parsha this week, which is Acharei. And so the parsha of Acharei is going to take us straight into the laws of Yom Kippur. And the laws of Yom Kippur are really actually quite interesting. Actually, I originally thought that maybe I was just going to do, let me scroll us back up to Acharei here a little bit. It's worth getting to the beginning of this. Okay. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe acharei mot shnei bnei Aaron. So this is after the death of the two sons of Aaron. So this articulation, it seems in a way unnecessary. Why do I have to learn about the death of the sons of Aaron right now? This seems to be not something that is at all necessary to deal with when you are in the midst of you're about to present the laws of Yom Kippur. But I think actually it is a very relevant piece of information for two distinct reasons. One reason is that Aaron is the Kohen Gadol goes to the innermost part of the temple on Yom Kippur. That's a very central part of the whole picture. Is the sense that this is maybe the only day where you really, really go to the heart of the temple and you confront God in the most direct way possible. All of the other days, you are at least projecting from a farther distance. You are in the holy, but not the holy of holies. And the two sons of Aaron went into that space. And so here it's the instructions about how to properly go into that space, how to go into that space as you are commanded, as opposed to the sons of Aaron who went differently. The Netziv, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, has a very, very interesting interpretation. His interpretation revolves around the fact that Nadav and Avihu were two people who went into this holy space. And perhaps he suggests each one had the idea in and of himself, and he went in uh, believing in himself um, without consulting others. And so it's sort of this, a little bit of this competitive action about two people trying to be head of the same community. And the procedure of Yom Kippur requires a certain single point of light, encapsulated in a single individual, and that is the Kohen Gadol. And so this story, this parsha, is going to bring us to a moment where we're going to see the Kohen Gadol act completely on his own. So then once again, why do we mention the two sons of Aaron? For two reasons. One is they went without permission. This is how you go permission. Number two is they went as two, and you need to come here as one. Okay, is that clear? Makes sense? Just want to make sure I'm transmitting with some sense of clarity there.
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so and here we get Vayomer Hashem Moshe Daber al Aaron achicha vayavo b'chol et hakodesh. He says to him, "Do not come at will into the holiest space, right? Mibeit la parochet, from the inner side of the curtain, el pnei kaporet, facing the kaporet is the cover of the ark, asher al Aaron, which is on the ark of the covenant, right? And it will tell us bizot yavo Aaron el hakodesh, right? Just gonna pull up the annotator. Feel somehow that it right? Bezot yavo Aaron el hakodesh, right? This is the way to enter the holies, right? Now, what we will see, and this is something which gets detailed in the liturgy of Yom Kippur, although I have to tell you that many people don't end up in synagogue long enough to hear this. But if you stay all the way through Musaf, you will hear this discussion. There is a whole ceremony we go through where the Kohen Gadol is going to confess three separate times. Once for himself and for his household, once for the house of Aaron, and the last time for the entirety of. And so this is where the Torah is going to describe all of these things. Um, just now, there's another. Yeah,
Question?
go ahead. Yeah.
Why does it not say in Parashat Shmini that's the reason why the two sons of Aaron were killed, rather than it says Esh Zara? You gave two explanations, and none of those are mentioned in Shmini.
As Eish Zara Asher Lo Tziva, right? It was
Yeah.
a strange fire that was not commanded. So
Right.
the first explanation fits very neatly with that. They went in an unsanctioned fashion, right? The only way you can go is sanctioned. And
Yes.
now we're telling there's one day when this happens, right? That is when you go, right? So this is that my first explanation is that they were not doing so in the way that the Kohen Gadol it was meant to in Yom Kippur, and it's very clear that they weren't commanded, and so that's why it's a foreign fire, because it wasn't under the blessing of command. So at least right so far, I think you'd have to agree with my assessment, right?
Yeah, Sherlot Siva, yes, of course.
Okay. The second part of my assessment, which comes from the Netziv, is now you're going to force me to go back, but let's see if we can see it in the verses.
הנה ותצא אש,
Okay. ויקחו בני אהרון נדב ואביהו, איש תחתו. Right? So here the Netziv understands this. Each one took his own fire pan, right? Now, when you
yes.
contrast that with the fact that Aaron has to go in on his own, the fact that the verse bothers to tell us that each one brought his own fire pan suggests that there was sort of, if you will, there was a little bit of competition between them with this sense of initiative, and they were very elated by it.
I see.
It's a subtle point. I can see, but the idea that each one brings his own as opposed to the fire pan.
It's absolutely clear. It's absolutely clear what you're saying. It specifically says ish machtato.
Right.
Yeah.
So yes. All right. So I granted the Torah sometimes speaks in subtle terms, but
Slicha, being that they are the sons of the Kohen Gadol, aren't they supposed to know that they're not allowed to do that?
You know, how should I put this?
The rules have not been given.
I'll give you what might be a similar version, right? When David HaMelech dies, or when he's near death, right? You have Adoniah and Shlomo both competing for the throne, right? Shouldn't it be known that first of all, David is not dead? Second of all, shouldn't it be known that there's a succession plan, right?
Yes.
But yet, human competition sometimes ignores the rules because of the temptation of the of power is very tempting, right?
But on the other hand, they were together. I mean, let's say only Nadav would have said, okay, I'm not going to tell my brother, and I'm going to do that. But they did it together.
Well,
they were giving each other koach. I don't know.
Well, they could have been giving each other koach. They could have been competing, right? But
right.
I think it's important to understand that the story here is that there's one person who goes in there. And I think that this is, a very critical point, is that when you go into this holy space, you need to sort of take your ego, you have to extract your ego from the situation. You represent all Israel here, right? You don't represent your own ambition. And that would be what I would say what was part of the problem. Okay. 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 All right. So we now come to a little bit more of the story of Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, it has the Kohen Gadol, this individual. He is focused in the center of this ceremony, right? And the Kohen Gadol is going to represent the entire Jewish people. And one of the things that he does is he confesses on their behalf for all of their sins. And there are two animals. There are two goats, right? And there's a goral. There's actually a lottery. And one goral, one of them, it says Seir LaHashem. One becomes a sin offering, and the other one it becomes the scapegoat. It's taken out to the desert. And so the story of these two sacrifices is quite interesting. They are very, very, very unique. It is the only sin offering that is actually brought, which is done for purposeful sins. And so it's a very unique moment. It's a moment that sort of reflects, if you will, a bit of the central purpose of the Beit HaMikdash, to be a place where forgiveness can be obtained. And this is the moment which is really, in a way, it is the most important moment of all. And so it comes with a lot of hype. I want to just point out, just because part of what we're looking here is the structural, right? So this is the reading on Yom Kippur. Now look at what section 17 is, right? Section 17 is by the Ber Hashem al Moshe Lemor, and God spoke to Moses saying, Daber el Aaron vel banav vel kol bnei Yisrael marta alehem ze hadavar asher tzivah Hashem lemor. Say, this is what you should say to Aaron, and this is what you're supposed to command him. Ish mi beit Yisrael asher yishchat shor o keves o eiz b'machaneh o asher yishchat michutz lamachaneh. So anybody who wants to slaughter an animal, these are all kosher animals, right? Within the camp, vel petach ol lo heviu, but he doesn't do it at the Ohel Moed. He decides he's got a better place. He wants to make a shtibel in his own house. La'akriv korban la'Hashem lifnei mishkan Hashem, dam yichashev le'ish hahu, dam shafach v'nichrat ha'ish hahu mikerev amo. And he doesn't bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to present it an offering to Hashem before Hashem's tabernacle. Blood guilt shall be imputed to that party. Having shed blood, that person shall be cut off from his people. This is a prohibition against having your own little temple, right? Let's say I live a little bit far. Now, right now, at this point, when Moses is taking this instruction, everybody lives close. There's one camp of Israel. You know, the farthest you can live is not terribly far. We're not talking about traveling from Kiryat Shmona to Yerushalayim. But the story that the Torah is telling us is that people who do this is an act of guilt. Now, I'm a rabbi, and I have I guess I am forced. Well, maybe I'm not forced, but I am how should I say predisposed to think like a rabbi. And one of the things that really incenses rabbis is breakaway minions, right? That there are people who want to, take the unity of a shul and break it apart. And people have all sorts of different things. The davening is too fast, the davening is too slow, the rabbi is too pro-Israel, the rabbi is not pro-Israel enough, the rabbi's too left-wing, the rabbi's too right-wing, right? Yeah, we've all hung around Jewish communities long enough to know about what breaks apart a community. Here, though, the Torah is not going to stomach any of that, right? I don't care how good your reason is. You do not bring a sacrifice outside. Now, in the temples or in the desert scenario, they didn't have minyanim in the way that we do. That doesn't just simply not part of the way that they roll. And so here, the whole discussion is really about the action is all karbanot, right? And if you're going to do your karban in some other foreign place, you are splitting the unity of the people. And so this is a very important chapter. Okay. All right. Now we get to a central point. I want to go back to my slideshow. Okay, so you got, so we just did Acharei Mot. We're about to do the the Kedoshim, and we're going to see that Kedoshim is the 10 Commandments specified. The second half of the parsha has to do with sexual morality. We should be clear. Sexual morality is also another one which comes up it comes up at the end of Acharei Mot. If we have time, maybe we'll get into that a little bit. And more is the laws of the Kohanim and laws of holiday. And then the book of Vayikra ends with the laws of the sabbatical year. So that's just an overview of the book of Vayikra. You should know, by the way, there are some people who like to analyze the Torah based on sort of its overall arching structure. And so the middle of the Torah actually is by most measurements put the middle of the Torah in Parshat Shmini, right? It's going to depend on whether you measure it by words, by letters, by words, or by sentences. I believe that by sentences might be somewhere else. But we are getting to, if you will, to the centerpiece of the Torah. And you might make the argument that Parshat Kedoshim is the centerpiece. And we're going to see, I want to show you something very interesting about Parshat Kedoshim, because I'm making the claim that Parshat Kedoshim is the center of the Ten Commandments. Oops. So let's, by the way, I'm very impressed. Usually when I ask AI to do stuff, it does it all wrong. So I asked the AI on this particular piece, summarize the Ten Commandments. And I think it did a reasonable job. You know, worship only one God, although that's not what the first commandment really says, but it says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher tzaticha me'eretz Mitzrayim. Excuse me. I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. Okay, I'll accept that. Do not worship idols. Do not misuse God's name. Observe the Sabbath. Honor your parents. Do not murder, adultery, steal, lie, and do not covet. Right? So that's sort of those are our 10 commandments. I'm not sure what the colors, why they put those colors there, but it's artificial intelligence. It's not regular intelligence. So who knows? Now, our mission here is, I said to you that the Parsha of Kedoshim is really a bit of a reworking of this. So, we're going to see how this gets reworked. Okay, so let me see where I want to start. Okay, let's start with honoring your father and your mother and Shabbat. So we're going to go to chapter 19, the beginning of Parshat Kedoshim. And we're going to see what this has to say. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe. More, God said to Moses, saying, okay, good. Daber el kol adat v'nei Israel. Speak to the entire children of Israel, v'amarta alehem, and you should say to them, Kedoshim to you, you shall be holy. Those words are I'm not going to call them problematic words. They're just words that are very pregnant and they require a lot of explanation. But let's just take that on faith for the moment, that it just means to be holy, which really is not a very concrete translation. We'll get more concrete on that. Ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokechem. I am the Lord your God, am also holy. Then sentence 3 is Ish imo v'aviv tirau. A person his mother and father should revere. Aved shabtotai tishmaru. And you should keep Shabbat. You have to guard the Shabbat. Ani Hashem Elokechem. I am the Lord your God. So,
my Shabbatot.
What?
My Shabbatot.
Right.
Shabtotai tishmor. Yeah, my Shabbatot.
Okay, right. You should, right. I said you should keep the Shabbat, but correct. This is God's Shabbat. So let's go back to our slide for a moment. And you see that we can tick off Shabbat, we can tick off honoring a mother and father, because you can re-articulate, and the Torah understands two separate prohibitions, or two separate, not necessarily prohibitions, but two separate mandates for ish imo v'aviv tirau. A person should his mother and father fear. Now, it is a problem that most of the people on this call are currently parents without, at the same time, being children to someone alive. Not exclusively, but many, right? So, what Rashi's anybody know what Rashi's interpretation is as a man his mother and father should fear?
No. No.
It says, Shelo yistor devarav. Do not contradict your parents. It was worth coming to the class for that alone. Right?
Is that possible?
What?
Is it possible to raise children that don't contradict you?
Well, so, well, maybe they can contradict you, but they're not allowed to contradict you in public.
It's easier, Rabbi, not to answer back, right?
Right. Don't answer back.
Yeah.
What if your parent is wrong? What are you supposed to do? So the halacha says you're supposed to say, Dad, you said the garbage is collected on Tuesday. I think it's collected on Wednesday. Let's look at the website. Let's look at that together. right? Um, More to the point, the father says, I don't know. The father says, um, you're a lot. Um, you're allowed to kindle a fire on Yom Tov, right? The son says, I'm not 100% sure you're allowed to, strike a match on Yom Tov. I think you're allowed to transfer. Let's look at the Shulchan Aruch. What does the Shulchan Aruch say? If after looking at the Shulchan Aruch, the father says, okay, son, you were right. I was wrong. Good. Um, so that's the import of this concept, right? Okay. So that's a man his mother and father should fear. Um, so and of course we saw the Shabbat black and white. You could even say Ani Hashem is I am one God, but I'm not sure we have to come to that. All right. So let's look at the next one. Right, not having false God. So we're going back to our Kedoshim. Right, Al tifnu el alilim. Do not turn to idols or make molten gods for yourselves. Right, I am the Lord your God. So again, we see a third one that is on the list. Okay, so um, um, let's think of another. Which one of the 10 Commandments? I'll go back to the 10 Commandments slide. Which one is the one you think is going to be hardest to make materialize in Parshat Kedoshim? Which is the one which you expect not to find? Nothing. Crickets. Nobody?
Not to covet. Not to covet is
All
hard to
right,
do.
good. Do not covet, right? So do not covet is, it's a very tricky kind of a law because coveting means you want something that somebody else has. And the rabbis understand it as an aggravating offense to the laws of
Adultery.
right? That if I really, really, really want you know, if I really, really, really want your beach house, and I do all sorts of mishagas to try and force you to sell it to me, that's considered, if I dispossess you of it, that's considered, once I dispossess you of it, that's called do not covet. So here, it may not be super easy to find that, but there is a whole section about loti kom veloti toret b'nei amech. So let's um, here we go. Sentence 18. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against members of your people. You should love your neighbor as you love yourself. I am Hashem. So let's just unpack some of these ideas. Nikama means vengeance. But the Talmud has a very specific scenario. They said, look, I come to you and I say, can I borrow your lawnmower? And you say, sorry, it's a new lawnmower and I want to keep it in good condition. I'm not really lending it out. So I say, fine. The next day you're using your lawnmower and you discover that you've got this big stump in your backyard, and you say to me, hey, Rosenblatt, can I borrow your stump grinder? And I say, well, you didn't let me borrow your lawnmower, so I'm not going to let you borrow, my tool. That's called vengeance. Now, what is lo titor? Lo titor is a harder thing. Which is translated as bearing a grudge. What does it mean to bear a grudge? It means I come to you and say, can I borrow your lawnmower? And you say no. And then the next day you come to me and ask me for one of my tools. And I say, you wouldn't let me borrow your lawnmower, but I'm really a better person than you. And I will let you borrow my whatever tools, right? That's lo titor. That's the problem of being vengeful. And so I think both of those are a little bit about the idea of humans competing with each other, and I think that has some parallels to the do not covet. But what is beautiful about it is the end of the verse. You should love your neighbor as you love yourself, right? I'm going to pause for a moment for a little Hasidic humor. There's a story they tell about the Barditchever. The Barditchever once went to the home of a Gvir who had a beautiful fish served to him and on a plate. And he says to the Barditchever, I love fish. And the Barditchever says, I don't think you love fish. He says, no, I do. Every night they prepare for me a different kind of fish, and it's delicious. You should have some. I love fish, so they make me fish all the time. The Barditchever says, no, I do not believe you love fish, because if you loved fish, it would still be swimming. Okay? I'm assuming that you're all laughing behind your mutes. But
yeah, it was funny.
Yeah, and profound at the same time. So here's the thing, right? If you may be I'm hitting all the I'm all over the place tonight. For those of you who are fans of Rick Springfield, right? The old song, I wish that I had Jesse's girl. I wish that I had Jesse's girl is a violation of lo tachmod, one shall not covet, right? Your neighbor's wife, right? That is not what the Torah preaches, right? And of course, if Rick Springfield should be successful at getting Jesse's girl, I would imagine Jesse would be quite upset, because then Jessie would no longer be Jesse's girl, as the song would have it. So this is a problem, right? And so if you're going to be coveting that which is your neighbor's, and the only way to fulfill that is by dispossessing your neighbor of that, that is hardly v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, right? That is going to be the exact opposite of loving your neighbor as yourself. Okay, so we went to one of the more obscure of them. Hold on. But let's maybe the one which has the broadest explanation is that which is do not steal. Do not literally dispossess anyone of something. And so here, Parshat Kedoshim ends up being much more interesting, because Parshat Kedoshim is going to tell us that there are many, many ways in which this can happen, right? So we're going to see lo ta'ashok et re'acha, do not defraud your fellow Israelite. You shall not commit robbery. Lo tigzol. So generally speaking, we understand the difference between geneva, which is in the 10 Commandments, and gzela, which appears here. Geneva is when you steal, when you go steal something from his house and he's not home. It's breaking and entering. Lo tigzol, that's armed robbery, right? Now, fair enough. Not sure we all needed that to be spelled out, but maybe there's some good reason for it. But here is one which certainly is a form of theft, which needs to be properly articulated. Lo ta'alin pulat sachir itacha ad boker. Do not withhold the wages of your worker until the morning. And the Talmud spends a lot of time trying to figure out, exactly what the scenario is when this happens. But it essentially means you can have a very short window of time to pay your workers, and it understands that even though the Torah prohibits leveraging the time value of money for interest, at the same time it's going to say we appreciate that there's a time value to money, and you must pay your workers on time. Now, this, by the way, most of us, if we are employers or employees, we probably get paid either on the 15th and the 30th of the last day of the month, or we get paid, on Friday morning every other week, right? And that's because we've arranged it. That's how our employees do their bookkeeping, and we've more or less agreed to that. And if you pay your workers that way, you have not violated this particular commandment. However, if you have a ichves, um, an electrician, a plumber, a drywaller, a handyman, your gardening company. I'm just trying to think of those things which are typically caregivers of various sorts. If you do not pay them on time, even if they're not Jewish, you violate this particular commandment. And so this, I think, we can safely say is a derivative of stealing. One of the 10 Commandments is Lo tisha. It's shem. I'm sorry. Lo tamod.
לא תישא את שם השם לשווא.
No, not Shem Hashem Lashav. It is. Oh my goodness. Hold on.
Give us a hint.
It's Eid Sheker.
Oh. לא תלך לחיוב.
It is Lo ta'neberecha Eid Shaker, right? You shall not oppress your neighbor as being a false witness, right? So here, it tells you with greater specificity. Lo tishabu bishmi lashaker. You shall not swear falsely with my name, which could be two different things, right? And it's also v'chilata Hashem Hashem Elokecha, Ani Hashem, and you have disgraced God's name. So it could also be the third commandment and the eighth commandment, or is that the ninth? Together. So you see how all these commandments sort of fall in. So we've covered more or less the following, right? We worshiping one God, that is Ani Hashem. Do not turn to false gods. That's already at the beginning. Do not disgrace. Do not disgrace God's name, right? There may be a couple different places to see that. Number one, what we just saw, right? That do not disgrace God's name. And it appears in a number of different places in the parsha. Also, we have a commandment to be holy. So that may also be the positive version of do not disgrace God's name. Is if disgracing God's name, we call that a chilul Hashem, chilata Hashem Hashem Elokecha. You shall defame God's name. So therefore, being holy is a way of sanctifying God's name. We saw that Shabbat was there. We saw that honoring mother and father was there. We looked at. We have not looked yet at murder. So the sixth commandment is you shall not murder. And so where does this come up? So again, let's look at, there are a number of verses which talk about doing violence to others. Lo tekalel cheresh, you shall not curse the deaf, v'lifnei iver lo titein michshol, and you shouldn't put a stumbling block in front of the blind. Now, I'm not sure what happens when you do put a stumbling block in front of the blind. Is it just really funny because the blind guy trips? Or is it really dangerous? Maybe it's both. But this is certainly an act of aggression. And there is another part of this, which is, we'll get there, Lo telech rachil ba'amecha, you shall not be a talebearer. So certainly damaging someone's reputation could also be seen as a form of murder. Now, again, I'm granting that I'm working a little bit harder to give you more of an interpretation, but you can clearly see that many of the 10 commandments are showing up here. And so then maybe the parsha is asking you to read further into it. But lo tamod adam re'echa may be a positive inversion of the same. If killing someone is taking a knife and stabbing it in their stomach, then what's the act of standing by and watching him bleed out? That's lo tamod adam re'echa. You shall not stand idly by. And so the Jewish law requires someone to be interventionist. They require you to intervene to save someone's life. Okay, Reb Mordechai, you have your hand up.
Shalom, Rabbi. Paying your workers on time, is there an overlap possibly with the concept of not taking interest?
So I planted that idea in your head, if I'm not mistaken, because I said that this is where the halacha does recognize the time value of money, and It also recognizes that he may have nothing to eat.
Yes.
That's in the book of Devarim, I believe.
Yes. I sort of caught that, but it's just clarifying.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So back to my little list here. So the one which is hardest to find in the list, there is one point of the parsha which talks about something called a shifra charufa. It's a very unique case and probably one that almost never existed. You have a case where someone is convert. One of the pathways to conversion is to be taken as a Hebrew slave, an Eved Ivri, or a Shifra Kanaanit, which is the female version, and you get converted, and after conversion, you are, and you go to mikvah, you're released, you're freed, and after that, you become fully Jewish. So that's one way to adopt such a thing. We obviously don't use it anymore. It probably disappeared millennia ago, but there is a section of Parshat Kedoshim which deals with this, which is a little bit of, you might see as the equivalent of do not commit adultery. But you could also see the very beginning, and we didn't really discuss this, but I'm going to take an extra minute to do so. The beginning of the parsha is Kedoshim to you. You should be holy. Now, this is the commentators do a very, very significant questioning of this, because they say, wait a minute, the whole Torah is really about being holy. Why is it that we have a separate command to be holy? So Rashi tells us that might mean prushim to you. You should be extremely modest. So I would assume that modesty is sort of the fence around adultery, and so that maybe adultery is also mentioned in that way, really up front. There is another interpretation, actually a very beautiful and important interpretation. Nachmanides, the Ramban says that is the meaning of that particular verse of Kedoshim to you, is that there's a possibility of being what's called naval b'reshut haTorah. You can be disgusting within the laws of the Torah. So let's just say, and I think this is Ramban's example. Let's just say there's a man out there who wants to marry a different woman every night, and he has a traveling beit din in his employ, right? And every morning, when he tires of last night's bride, he divorces her and then goes in search of his next bride. Well, this is not what the Torah intended. Is it kosher? Has he violated any laws of Shulchan Aruch? He has not. But this is certainly not what the Torah is looking for. So that's why the Ramban calls that naval b'reshut haTorah. There's another way to look at that. I once heard this from my colleague, friend, Rabbi Asaf Bednarsh, who is now a rabbi at the Grus Kollel in Jerusalem, Yeshiva University's operation there. And Rabbi Bednarsh basically said, you know what? This is the first kernels of the idea of a religious stringency, right? So I'm going to give you a religious stringency. There's some people who say, I'm not going to sell any chametz. I'm going to get rid of everything. The only things I'm going to sell things that are maybe corn, chickpeas, but not anything that has real, flour or bread in it. I'm not going to sell my pasta. I'm not going to own whiskey over, I'm not going to deal with this the whole problem. Now, what's the stringency there? The stringency there is, well, we do sell it, and I stand behind the sale, and Rabbi Fegelstock stands behind the sale, and it's a real true sale of chametz, and the non-Jew is welcome to come to your cabinet and get your whiskey. But if you really want to be true to what the Torah said, right? Tashbitu seor mibatechem, expunge all chametz from your household. So how do you make sure that you expunge it all from your household? Get rid of it all. You're not doing this weird saily-waily thing, right? That's a stringency, because you're basically saying, I am going to the letter of the law. I'm going beyond the letter of the law. I'm going to the spirit. I'm going to be a little bit more serious about it. So every stringency is a way of saying, I am trying to be more particular about the law. One of the things which I think is just worth noting is hypocrisy is maybe the greatest enemy of the transmission of religion. And so here the Torah is basically saying to you, or at least the Ramban is saying to you, banish the behaviors of hypocrisy. That is what the Torah wants for us on this. Okay, so I'm going to say Adkan until this point. We have been doing the parsha. So maybe I'll just go back and just do a quick summary, right? We see sort of the book of the Kedoshim is sort of a reworking of the Ten Commandments. Worship on God, do not turn to false gods, do not disgrace Hashem's name, Shabbat, the honor, fearing parents is there. By the way, I did not mention, I told you fearing parents means you should not allow people to, you cannot contradict your parents. But what kabed avicha v'etimecha means that it's understood to be feeding and clothing and supporting them. So when your parents get old, is perhaps when that is most important, that's what that law means. And you saw we sort of went through all of them. Okay, so we have now sort of gone through Kedoshim. In just a minute, I guess we're going to start the second half, which is a bit of the basics of Judaism. But Annie, you have your hand up.
Yes. With regard to Pasuk Yud Zayin, לא תשנא את אחיך בלבביך, that's clearly connected with ואהבת לרעך כמוך. But
okay, I'm glad you asked about this.
The continuation, תוכיח את עמיתך, לא תישא עליו חטא. Where would that fit? This is to rebuke.
Okay.
Your neighbor.
This is the verse that they should put on the Canadian flag. Okay. Now, if you're in Israel and you have a friend and you did something bad to that friend, what would the friend do?
He would come and talk about it to me.
That's right. They would say, Annie, how could you do this to me? We've been friends for 20 years. Why would you say this about me? And you'd say, oh, I wasn't thinking, or whatever. You fight about it, and then maybe, you work things out. In Canada, I shouldn't speak Lashon Hara about Canada, but in Canada, we're much less direct about these things. So maybe we mention something to a friend, can you believe? Or Nash maybe wouldn't say that, I was just so hurt, Annie did this, and it wasn't so nice, and, they don't tell you up to your face. I discovered that here in Canada, my first year. And so here, this is what the verse says. Lo telech rachel ba'amecha. Don't tell stories about someone. Lo tamod ad amrecha. Don't stand idly by. And then what's the problem, right? If you are a Canadian and you don't confront the person, so you might tell gossip about them. Lo tisnat achicha bilvavecha. Don't hate them in your heart either, right? Don't let it fester. You shall certainly chastise them. You shall certainly reprove them, give them criticism.
It sounds like rebuke. Rebuke.
Yeah, a rebuke. I hate the word rebuke. I never know what that means. But hocheach means to correct someone. Now, this is a fascinating thing, and I think the Torah is so right. The Torah says, "Kol ahavash." The midrash in Midrash Rabbah in Breshit says, "Kol ahava she'eni matochacha." Any love that does not have within it rebuke, eino ava, not real love. If all you do is flatter the person, you don't really care about them. It's not really a friendship. And so here, I see these as these two sentences, 17 and 18, are very intimately connected. Because it's about gossip is a powerful tool. Reputational damage is a powerful tool. And it can be a very strong corrective to bad behavior, right? The entire institution of the newspaper is based on this. But it also can be used unfairly. But we often use that as a way of dealing with our problems without confronting the source of the problems. It is much less effective to gossip about a coworker than to speak to them and say, it really bothers me that you do not meet deadlines, right? if you complain to the other members of the office pool who are not directly responsible for this person's deadlines, and you gossip about them, you're not really helping get the deadlines met. You are just doing things that make you feel good. And so this is a very powerful piece from the Torah. Okay.